I'd like to welcome you to Fearless Emotion Management again today. We're on our third week of learning more about how to better understand and manage stress and anxiety, PTSD, things like suicide. This is a collaboration workshop between BYU Idaho Wellness Center and BYU Idaho Counseling Center. And we'll begin today by, again, just doing an overview, probably here for the first 20 to 25 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. This is being recorded, so if you don't want your face or your name to be recorded today, you can change your name or turn off your video and audio so you're not being recorded. You can do that. Again, we will open it up here in about 25 to 30 minutes for questions. So please write down questions that you have so that when we do open it up, you can ask those at that time. So for those who have been with us the last couple of weeks, you'll know that sometimes I share slides that contain references to spiritual teachings. And I want to emphasize that these are my interpretations. So in no way does this mean that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or BYU Idaho specifically support the ideas that I present here. So we've talked about how Fearless Emotion Management contains 4 steps. We've talked about the first 2, and that's finding yourself and your safety. And the second has been ease your lizard brain. And we'll talk about 2 more in the weeks to come. That's assuring your security guard and learning how repetition literally grows hope in the brain. That hope is not just a metaphorical thing, hope is a literal thing in your brain. And we'll talk about how we grow that in later weeks in this workshop. If you weren't here for the first several weeks and you want to learn more, you can always go to sites.google.com and get a refresher. It's /view/fear-less. You can get a refresher on what we're talking about, these steps. We have been talking last week about easing your lizard brain, and today we're going to continue that conversation. So, for those who were here last week, we talked about the lizard brain. And when I'm talking about the lizard brain, I'm talking about your autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is the part of your brain that gets your body ready for defending yourself in times of immediate physical danger. So it can move into things like freeze, fight, or flight. So what we're talking about here today, though, is if your brain is receiving information that you're in immediate physical danger, these freeze, fight, or flight responses are very helpful and useful. If, however, you're receiving this information and there's no actual immediate threat, then we start to develop problems. So last week we talked about some of the freeze responses. These are things like being emotionally numb, disconnected, lack of interest or pleasure, excessive tiredness, no meaning, rapid weight gain or loss, excessive self-doubt, feelings of worthlessness. These are actually all incredibly useful and helpful responses if you're dealing with a situation that is immediately physically dangerous and it's overwhelming. There's nothing you can do about it. These are a healthy response. If you're having this response, but you're actually immediately physically safe, then we call this depression. If your brain looks out and sees the environment as dangerous, but you can handle it, then you're going to get a fight or flight response, like tension in your neck, your heart pounding, jittery legs, tight stomach, things like clenching in your jaw, sweaty palms, racing thoughts, breathlessness, agitation. These are all very useful reactions if you're in a kind of an immediately physically threatening environment, but you're either strong or fast enough to deal with it. But if you're in an environment where you're already immediately physically safe, then we call these responses anxiety. So depression and anxiety are simply the fear responses occurring in your body, those freeze, fight, or flight responses occurring when there's no immediate physical danger present in your life. If you are immediately physically safe, then the healthiest response to that is to relax. We want to relax and get the lizard brain to calm down if you're in immediate physical safety. So sometimes we'll use terms like use your body to calm your mind. I'm going to switch now to talking about, last week we talked about a couple of strategies. How we use our electronics matter, how we hold our body position matters, and today we're going to talk about a few other strategies. All of these involve first knowing that you're immediately physically safe. If you're having a fear response, first check to see that you're immediately physically safe. Then the next healthiest response is to relax your body, and you can do that through changing your posture or changing your muscle tension, unclenching, relaxing, changing your breathing. And I'm going to go now to talk about how we can use our heart rate to do some of that. So for anybody who's just joined us, again, please write down questions. I'm going to be sharing a lot here for the next 15 to 20 minutes. And JC, the social work intern who's with us today, she'll also be sharing. But please write down questions so that when we're done sharing, you can ask those questions of us. So your heart rate. What I'm going to invite each of you to do is to figure out what your heart rate is right now. So there's lots of ways to do this. If you happen to have a stethoscope, you can measure your heart rate this way, like this gentleman's measuring the heart rate of a zebra. If you happen to have one of these smart watches that can measure your heart rate, you can do it that way. Or you can do it the old-fashioned way. You can simply find the place on your wrist to measure your pulse, or measure it with the vein going in your throat, so the artery going in your throat. So I'm going to give you 20 seconds and just count your heartbeats, and then we're going to times them by 3 to get your current heart rate. So go ahead and begin counting now. Okay, so that's been 20 seconds. My heart rate's going pretty fast right now, I guess. I've got 27, so I'm going to times that by 3 to get my heart rate. So that would be 81, I believe. So my heart rate is 81. Now what we want to do is to take that heart rate and compare it to something called your resting heart rate. Now you may or may not know what your resting heart rate is right now. For most people, it's going to be between 60 and 100. And the best way to find your resting heart rate is first thing in the morning before you roll out of bed, go ahead and measure your heart rate when you're completely relaxed and calm. This is your basal metabolic rate heart rate. And then once you know your resting heart rate, then you can compare it to your current heart rate. So I know for me that my regular resting heart rate is somewhere in the low to mid 60s. And I just had a heart rate of 81. What's really interesting is 20 beats per minute over your resting heart rate likely indicates a fear response. So because I have a heart rate right now of 81, it may indicate that I'm actually moving into a fear response, which for me at least makes sense, because when I'm presenting, I start to get a little bit excited and my heart rate improves and increases. So I can easily move into a fear response when I'm giving a presentation. So it makes sense. For you, if you happen to know your resting heart rate, just notice if your current heart rate is 20 beats per minute over your resting heart rate. And if it is, you might want to consider that you're actually having a fear response. And if you are, of course, then it's a good time to notice if you're actually physically safe. So for me, there's nothing in my environment that's about to hurt me or harm me in any way. So if I'm having a fear response, it's probably because I'm having an emotional fear or I'm fearing about something in the future, none of which is going to hurt me right now. So my rapid heart rate is probably not necessarily helping me. I do want to emphasize when we're dealing with heart rates that always consult your doctor. Like if your resting heart rate is consistently above 100, it'd be a very good time to talk with your doctor and see if there's something going on. Or if you're not an athlete, if you're not a trained athlete and your heart rate is lower than 60, you may also want to consult with your physician to make sure that everything's okay with your heart. Assuming you've done that, then the heart rate can be a really useful way to begin to kind of know if you're having a fear response. So here's what happens. So if we're having a fear response, so our brain has perceived some sort of threat and the lizard brain gets activated, it sends a message down into the body to get us ready to deal with the threat. As your heart rate goes up, the blood in your brain goes down. So that blood that holds the oxygen and glucose we need for thinking up in our frontal lobes leaves the frontal lobes, goes down into the body as the heart rate increases. So knowing if your heart is going too fast can also let you know where the blood is. Because if your heart is racing, it's trying to get blood to your large muscle groups. Another way of saying this, maybe a less nice way of saying this, is you become more stupider, right? Because that precious blood leaves the frontal lobes and goes down into your body. This is, of course, is really helpful when you're actually in danger. Like when you're actually dealing with threat, you don't need to be very smart. You just need to be strong or fast or invisible. So it makes sense for the blood to go to the body. But we're talking about depression and anxiety, and that's when blood is leaving the frontal lobes, when you actually need that blood in your frontal lobes. So we can actually use our pulse to begin to know if we're having a fear response. If you actually have a spare $25 or you have your phone handy, you can get one of these little pulse oximeters off Amazon and just begin monitoring your heart rate. It's common for many of us to begin to ignore the symptoms of the fear response or stress. We just assume it's natural. And what we can do is become more aware of using our heart rate. Maybe we're going into a fear response more often than is helpful. So monitoring your heart rate in different situations can help you begin to learn when you're being stressed to the point that it's no longer helpful. Having your heart rate go up a little bit is very useful. That's a useful stress. But once it's gone over 20 beats per minute faster, unless you're purposely exercising, then it's likely you're moving into a fear response. So it might be a good time to take a break and calm your heart rate down. So keeping your pulse near your resting heart rate actually keeps more blood flow up in your frontal lobes. And of course, that's where we want the blood. When we're dealing with emotional threats, emotional dangers, emotional pain, we want blood in the frontal lobes. When we're dealing with future threats, things that could hurt us in the future, again, we want blood in the frontal lobes so that we can have good planning. Here's another way to use your heart rate. So you can actually use some way of measuring your heart rate in real time while you're having a conversation with somebody you care about. Maybe it's a friend, a roommate, a spouse, a child, whoever it happens to be. And the two of you in advance agree that if anybody's heart rate goes 20 beats per minute above the resting heart rate, then you pause the conversation until each of you have your heart rate back down to a resting level or only a mildly activated level. And here's why. If anybody's been involved in this situation, you probably know that the moment your heart rate goes a little bit higher, you start getting into the fight or flight mode, that blood, your intelligence, your ability to communicate dramatically drops. And of course, this is helpful, right? If you're actually in physical danger with the person, then you need to be punching them or running away from them. Hopefully you're in relationships that don't require that, so it would be better that you get blood back to your frontal lobe so that you can have a meaningful, helpful conversation. So using your heart rate can be a very effective strategy for doing that. If you ever want to learn more about that, look up the Gottman Institute. They've done a lot of research on couples, and this is one of the things they recommend. They may just make it simple and just say, hey, if anybody's heart rate goes over 100, we need to put the conversation on pause until we get that calmed down, and then we'll come back to communicating. This isn't about avoiding conversation. This is about using a few moments to calm the body down, get blood flow back in the frontal lobe so you can have good communication. So that's the way we can use our heart rate. A few of the ways we can use our heart rate. Sometimes we can call this biofeedback. And by the way, you can actually use your heart rate to calm your body. And one of the ways you can do that, if you happen to have a way of instantly measuring, so if you have something like a pulse oximeter and you put that on your finger and you watch it, with biofeedback, what you can do is deliberately get yourself relaxed and then try and increase your heart rate, see if you can do it, and also see if you can lower your heart rate and play around with that. It will help sensitize you to your heart rate, and you can begin using that in more and more situations to make sure that if you're having a fear response, you can recognize it, recognize you're safe, and then calm yourself down. So that's heart rate. Again, if you have questions about this, please write them down. I'm now going to talk to you. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and tell you about something else. And this is the tell tells the tale. And I want to give a preface to this is I was at a trauma conference and I was learning about this, and what I'm about to share with you, when I first heard it, I thought it was the hokiest, weirdest thing I'd ever heard. I thought it was so kooky that I didn't ever want to share it with anybody, but I decided, okay, I'll give it a try. And let me share with you what it is, and then I'll tell you how I responded to it when I used it. So if you look at this dog, you can probably instantly tell that it's having a fear response. Some of you might see this dog as really scared and timid. Others who've had experience with little dogs might see this as an aggressive dog that's just about ready to bite you. Whatever it is, you can know a lot about this dog by where its tail is. If the tail is between the legs, or if the tail is too stiff and not wagging, then you can know that this dog is likely in a fear response. Well, what's interesting is that all of us also have tails, every one of us. The tailbone is our tail, and it's connected to your pelvic floor muscles that move your tail when you experience a fear response. So whether you're having shame or anger, your tailbone responds to that. By the muscles tightening, your tail will move in or out, become stiff, or pull in based upon your emotions. So our tail, just like with the dog, actually can tell us a little bit about whether we're having a fear response. So what's interesting is we can actually use this to our advantage, right? We can flood our lizard brain. And remember, that's what we're going to do. We're going to use the body to flood the mind, flood the lizard brain with a sense of safety. And we can do that by learning to relax our tailbone. Another way of saying this is to relax the pelvic floor muscles. This muscle, by the way, is connected to the two sit bones and the tailbone. Kind of forms like a kind of a trampoline or a hammock shape that holds some of the organs up in the body. This is very useful and functional, and it also clenches when you're having a fear response. So there's a couple of easy ways to find this muscle. For some people, it's really easy. Other people, you might spend quite a while learning to find this muscle. I'd encourage you to give it a try, especially if you're alone. You can do this without any embarrassment. One of the ways is just to sit flat on a chair, kind of move back and forth, and notice where your sit bones are, the part of your posterior that are digging into the chair, and then also notice the third leg of the stool. Sometimes that's what the tailbone is called, is the third leg of the stool. helps to keep you balanced. Actually, a lot of researchers have no idea what the tailbone is for, but they think maybe it serves as the third leg of the stool for sitting. In any case, find that spot, and now what you're going to try and do is relax that spot, those muscles in between those 3 points. Another very easy way to find the tailbone muscles or the pelvic floor muscles is just to imagine if you were to stop urinating or trying to prevent yourself from passing gas. If you do any of those, you're going to clench up the pelvic floor muscles, and there you go. That's what they are. That's the muscle that we're actually trying to relax. And I'm being serious here. It's probably useful that you've emptied your bladder first before you attempt this, because we really are trying to relax the pelvic floor muscles. And if you do that too much and you need to go to the restroom, you'll have a problem. So please do that first. Find that muscle and then relax it. So I'll invite you for just a moment to do that now. If you can find it, just follow your spine down into the chair. See if you can notice any tension. If you can't do that right now, it's okay. You can try it later. If you notice any tension in your tailbone, just relax it. Okay? Some people like to imagine it's kind of like a trampoline or a hammock, and just imagine that muscle gently softening and expanding so that you can feel complete relaxation. If you find this, you'll instantly know it. Right? This muscle, this group of muscles, is directly connected to your autonomic nervous system. Right? The sympathetic nerve, the dorsal vagal parasympathetic nerve run directly into this. And here's what's really neat about this, is because it's directly linked, it's actually impossible to have a fear response if you have a completely relaxed and softened pelvic floor muscle. In other words, if you've relaxed your tailbone, you cannot have a physiological experience of fear. It's a really interesting phenomenon. Now you can clench up and relax and go back and forth really quickly, but you can't have a fear response with a relaxed pelvic floor. Now, if at this point you're thinking, this guy's weird, what is he talking about? That was my response when I first heard about this. I thought, this is kooky. What is this guy talking about? I was in Florida at the time, so my wife was with me at this trauma conference, and as we were flying home, the most interesting thing happened. The pilot got on the intercom and said, hey, for those of you who like bumpy flights, you're in for a real treat today. There's a lot of turbulence over the Rocky Mountains. So I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. I'm going to give this pelvic floor muscle thing a try. I'm going to relax my tailbone. And that's exactly what I did. And I have never been on a flight where it was this bumpy. The pilot was exactly right. It was a very bumpy ride. It's one of those rides where you could see the wingtips flapping as we were going through the turbulence, and everybody's body's jolting up and down. And what I did is I just focused on relaxing my pelvic floor muscles, the tailbone, and it was fascinating. I didn't experience any fear. And in fact, I was far more aware of everything that was happening around me. I could feel my wife's fingernails digging into my arm. She was in terror. I could hear people screaming. I could see people crying. This was pretty bad turbulence. And all I could be was interested. And I know that had I needed to help somebody, I could, because I wasn't experiencing any fear. And that's the moment I absolutely became a believer in learning how to relax the tailbone. I now use it all the time. I'm using it right now, and you can't even know that because you can't see me. I use it when I'm giving presentations in front of people, because it's something I can do and nobody even has to know I'm doing it. But I relax that tailbone and the fear goes away. My body's instantly able to relax, because it's impossible to have a relaxed tailbone and a fear response at the same time. So I know it sounds kooky. I'd encourage you to give it a try. So the reason this works, of course, is we're just flooding the lizard brain with a relaxation response and safety. And so that blood is able now to leave the large muscle groups, go back to the frontal lobes where I need it when I'm dealing with things that are not immediately physically dangerous. And just so you know, I've read a lot of books on airplanes. So I know that at no point was I actually in physical danger during that turbulence because I was strapped in, I was okay. So I knew I wasn't in immediate danger, even though it felt like I was. I knew I wasn't. So that's why I was able to relax my tailbone there. So again, please take notes, write questions if you have them. I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment because I'm going to give this presentation now over to JC, who has a couple of other strategies, ways that you can use to relax, relax your body in order to calm your mind. So JC, I'll turn off my audio and you can take over for a few minutes here.
Sounds good. So like Brother Johnson said, my name's JC. I'm currently working as the social work intern here at the counseling center on campus. And I just wanted to talk to you guys today about a couple techniques that help me when I find myself being stressed out. There's lots of ways to ease your lizard brain, as Brother Johnson calls it. But two that work the best for me are things that I've actually been doing kind of without realizing it since I was a little kid. I won't be offended if no one responds to this, but does anyone on here like yoga? Any big yoga enthusiasts?
I love yoga. Yoga's awesome.
Okay, we've got a couple. Well, then you guys might already know a little bit about this one. So there is a yoga pose, and now that I know that these two know what they're talking about, I will have to try extra hard to make sure I pronounce it correctly. This yoga pose is called Viparita Karani, I believe is how it's pronounced. And essentially what it is you lay down flat on your back on the floor and you lift your feet up so that they are resting against the wall. And I'm going to show you what I mean. I'm going to share the screen. Can everyone see this image?
It hasn't quite, there it is. Yeah, it's popped up now.
Okay. So again, hopefully this doesn't offend anyone, but I actually hate yoga. I've tried it a few different times. I even was signed up for a class at one point. That didn't last long, but I find it very hard to sit still and be in the moment and concentrate. Oh, it drives me nuts. I have very little patience, and yoga is just not for me. I enjoy high intensity, fast-paced cardio exercises. But one of the interesting things is that I have actually been doing this yoga pose without realizing it ever since I was little. If you can see, I'll switch it to this second picture. Now, I wasn't doing it maybe exactly the picture perfect yoga way, but ever since I was little, I would flop down on the ground or lay on my bed and I would kick my feet up on the wall. And I found myself reading in that position or talking to my sisters in that position. And when I learned about the yoga pose, Viparita Karani, I was surprised to realize that I had been doing that all along. So kind of taking it back to the science, like Brother Johnson was talking earlier, the whole idea of this second step, ease your lizard brain, is that we're using our body to send messages to our mind to help it calm down and get out of that fear and flight response stage. And when you are laying down, your back is flat, and you elevate your feet, it helps bring the blood flow back down to your brain, which is where it needs to be. Andrea, did you have a question or a comment to share? Oh, nope. Okay, that's fine. But yeah, like I said, I had been doing that since I was little without realizing that it was kind of a self-soothing technique. Another one that I've been doing for a long time is 7-Eleven breathing. Hopefully all of you have heard of the 7-Eleven gas station. So that's just kind of an easy number to remember. There are many different breathing techniques out there that help people kind of calm their heart rate and de-stress. This is the one that I like the most. So how it works, it's very straightforward and simple. You breathe in for 7 seconds, and then you breathe out for 11 seconds. So I want, if you guys will all just take a minute, sit up straight, relax your shoulders, and then I'm just gonna give us a slow count. Breathe in for 7 and out for 11. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. If you didn't make it all the way to 11 seconds, that's okay. The idea is to continue to do this over and over so that as you breathe in for those 7 seconds, you're making sure that your diaphragm is pulling down, that your lungs are expanding, and that you're getting the most oxygen you can in those 7 seconds. And then you're pushing that air all the way out because you're taking longer on the out breath and the in breath. And there are, like I said, there are tons of different breathing techniques that people find that helps them de-stress. This is just one that I found helpful for me. There's the Brother Johnson, I'm not sure if he's gonna share this one or not. There's a 4x4 breathing technique that I know a lot of people find useful. I personally don't like that one because it reminds me of swimming lessons and holding my breath, and that just makes my heart beat faster. So the wonderful thing though about all of these techniques is that you really just have to find what works for you. So the whole idea behind easing your lizard brain again is that you're using your body to send messages to your mind. So if you try next time you're laying on the couch and you prop your feet up on the wall and you find that that stresses you out because all you can think about is worrying about leaving stains on the wall and then you're going to get a big fee from the apartment during white gloves, maybe that technique's not for you. Feel free to try a different one. The wonderful thing about all of this is that they can really be individualized to what works best. And unless anyone has any questions, I will turn it back over to Brother Johnson.
Great, thank you, JC. And I want to reemphasize what she's saying, that we share lots of strategies, and that's all they are. They're just strategies. There's thousands of different ways to do this right. The idea is we want to use our bodies to send that message, kind of flood out our lizard brain that we're okay. So even though our lizard brain's receiving the message that we're somehow in danger, we can overcompensate by relaxing our body. And we do that because we know we're immediately physically safe. So if there's no immediate questions, I will share one other thought about the breathing, but I do really want questions first, if anybody has any.
I have as we practice these breathing techniques and calming ourselves, does that eventually get rid of the lizard brain more and more?
Yeah, this is actually skill. Here's what's really interesting as we look into the research, that just like any physical skill, if you've ever learned to play an instrument or you've learned to play a sport, at first those things were awkward, and pretty soon those physical movements become second nature. And it's the practice that does it. And it's especially practicing these things when you're not already in a fear state. It's hard to learn a new skill when you're already in a fear state because there's not blood flow up here. It's harder to learn those skills. But practicing these things again and again, hundreds of times prior to a fear state, makes it so they're almost second nature, so you can call on them at a moment's notice. If I notice I'm in the airplane and like the I'm experiencing turbulence, I know that I'm actually safe, even though I'm being jostled around. I know I'm safe. So it was easy for me because I had been practicing in the motel room prior to that. It was easy for me to relax my tailbone. So whether it's your tailbone or a breathing exercise, practice a lot before you get into the feared environment, and then you can employ that skill. I wanted to talk a little bit more, just because we're here at BYU Idaho, this is something I found very fascinating because the research has been showing for a long time that breathing in particular, whatever, and there's hundreds of breathing strategies, find the one that works for you. If it causes you to have a panic attack because you had swimming lessons like JC, find a different breathing technique. Find the one that works for you. If you didn't like hers, find a different one. Here's something really interesting is this statement might seem a little strange to you, that changing the way you breathe is part of repentance. I've been teaching breathing exercises for many, many years. And so I was super excited to actually hear that this is true. And here's how I know it's true. President Russell M. Nelson, this was a priesthood session in General Conference 2019. He said, when Jesus asks you and me to repent, he is inviting us to change even the way we breathe. So he included that as one of the ways that true repentance happens is by changing the way we breathe. Now, of course, as I've studied this, I know that when I change my breathing, my body starts to calm. I get blood flow up in my frontal lobes, and it is in the frontal lobes where we can connect with the Holy Ghost, with the Spirit. That's the location. That's our conscious self. That's where we can communicate with the divine, is in our frontal lobes. So breathing is a form of repentance, finding that technique that works for you. And again, please, this is my interpretation of things that are said. Don't hold the university responsible or even President Nelson responsible for my comments. But I found it very interesting that he included that as a way to turn back to Christ is to change the way we breathe. And just so you know, this is that 4-square breathing. If anybody's ever interested, you can also find that on the website. I've referred to the Fearless website before. And all of this, we're just getting blood flow back to the frontal lobes. We've got about 3 more minutes. Are there any other questions today?
I have one.
Yes.
I jumped in a couple minutes late, and so I don't fully understand the lizard brain thing.
Okay. Like what it even is. Okay. Let me switch screens here so I can give you a different visual of what this is all about. So I'm going to go back here. So for those who may have come in late, and you can also go to that website, what we're talking about with the lizard brain is we're talking about the freeze, fight, or flight system. That's your hindbrain or autonomic nervous system. It sends messages. So if your brain perceives that in any way you're in immediate physical danger, its job is to get your body activated or to shut it down to deal with the threat. So if your brain is perceiving, hey, this is a huge threat, we can't even deal with it, then it's going to shut you down so that you can start conserving energy. And that's really useful in immediate threat. But if you're not having immediate danger, we call it depression. If your brain perceives, oh, this is really dangerous, but I think I can handle it. Maybe I'm stronger than it or I'm faster than it. Then your lizard brain is going to activate the sympathetic nervous system to get you ready to deal with the threat. And so it's going to get your body all pumped up and racing and ready. You're going to have racing thoughts and all of those. That's great if you're dealing with immediate threat. If you're not, we call it anxiety, right? Because it's pulling needed blood away from your frontal lobes where you need it to deal with probably emotional threat. That's what most of us deal with, or some future threat. Does that answer a little bit about your question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I guess, why it's called the lizard brain. Is that what lizards do, or?
I call it the lizard brain because if you've ever been around this, I really like reptiles. They are the jumpiest creatures. They're so skittish. They respond to everything, every little noise. They jump, they squirm. That's why I call it the lizard brain. You're not going to find that in the scientific literature. So if you go to the research, you're going to find something called the polyvagal theory, and you're not going to find lizard brain in there. That's just my silly way of describing it.
I live in Florida, so there's a ton of lizards all outside my house. So
yes, all you got to do is walk down the sidewalk, and you think you're going to step on it, but they're skittish. They just dart away. And that's why I call it. It's just highly, highly reactive system. Within 0.03 of a second of your brain perceiving some sort of threat, your lizard brain already has your heart racing, right? It's really fast. Faster than you can think about it, your heart is racing.
So then is
I
that
was thinking of it also like lizards probably don't have a lot of intellectual thought. They just are reacting.
Yep.
It's purely physical reactions,
Mm-hmm.
not really
Yeah, they're
well
not thinking
thought
about
through.
consequences. Yep, they're highly reactive. Actually, this is where it comes. A lot of people refer to it as the reptilian brain. So I'm not that original here. Instead of saying reptilian brain, I'm saying lizard brain, just because it's more fun. But you're exactly right. It's just reacting. They don't have a lot of neocortex, frontal lobes to kind of moderate that. We do. They don't. They just are going to react, and they're always going to react.
would that be why when you are feeling anxious, sometimes confusion happens?
Mhm.
Like you're not sure what to place emphasis on, is because you don't have enough blood in your brain essentially to like.
That's exactly it. Yes. Because the lizard brain has got involved. The blood is literally shunted away from your frontal lobes. It's also shunted away from your gut, that's why you get those queasy feelings. But you're supposed to be strong and fast. You're not supposed to be smart. And so you're not. So this is when you say really dumb things in conversations with someone, because I get so activated, I start saying the dumbest things, and then I regret them later. Well, it's because I was dumb, right? I was activated, and the blood flowed away from my logic or reasoning brain.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I know we're out of time, so if people need to leave, you're welcome to. I have a couple more minutes if people have other questions. I think, and next week we're going to move on to learning how to assure your security guard. We'll learn that not only do we have a lizard in our brain, we also have a security guard in our brain, and we'll talk about that and how that is the thing that actually has been sending our lizard brain the messages. So if you want to come next week, you'll get to learn about that, and we'll learn how to use the mind to calm the body, work on the reverse process as well. But I can stay here for just a few more minutes if anybody else has any questions. And while I'm waiting for questions, I'm going to hurry and slip through this so that I can put up the resources if anybody's interested in any of these. All BYUI students and employees have free access to TAO. Great resources there if you want to learn some more strategies. Fearless emotion management is just one method. If you don't like it, find a different one. And then this is the suicide prevention hotline if anybody wanted to have someone to talk to. You don't have to be the one in crisis to call this. You can call this and they can maybe give you some ideas of how to help someone that you care